Hello, welcome. It is Science Mr. Robertson back in action, and today we have life reproduction. How different living things, plants, bacteria, animals, how they can make more of themselves. You could argue that the point of every kind of life is to make more life itself. That's what every life's aim, because eventually every single living thing will die. So it wants to find a way to continue to live. And I can start the smallest. I can start with those bacteria and some of those really smallest things, because they're certainly not making new versions of themselves like we make new babies. What bacteria can actually do is they can split their cells. What they can do, if I have my little bacteria here, with its nucleus where all the DNA is, what it can do, it can actually make that and make more copies of its DNA when life is good, and then split itself into two different cells. And then of course 2 can become 4. 4 can become 8. 8 becomes 16, and quite quickly you can have a pandemic. Because all of these bacteria can keep multiplying their numbers really, really quickly. But that means that this cell here is the same as both of these two here. They have made an exact copy of themselves. And make an exact copy of yourself is a word that we call cloning. You may have seen in the media people very scared about the idea of human cloning, to make copies of themselves. That's something which is certainly reasonably far away scientifically to happen, but is genetically possible at the very least. But this idea of cloning, it happens in nature anyway. Bacteria do this. What's even more bizarre is that plants can also do cloning, because plants have a very special ability. It works a lot easier in some than others. The strawberry plants, yudgum, it works very easy for them actually. You can take your plant, here's a little plant, really simple, and what you could do, you had a plant like this. I could cut off a section here, plant this in the ground here, and it would start to grow. All of the plants have the ability to start growing from new. It's hard. It needs to find somewhere stable where it can grow roots, find leaves of sunlight, all the rest of it, but it is possible. You can take what is called a cutting, take a little snippet of a plant, plant it somewhere else, and it can grow. However, plants can do this by themselves. Plants are able, not all, some of them, to actually have their roots come around and then start and grow a new plant here. Plants themselves can do this process, and they are cloning themselves. This plant here would be the same as this one here, and the same as this one here. So it is possible for plants to find a way to actually make copies of themselves. And humans do this. Humans do this because, hey, if I get a strawberry that's really tasty, I want to make more of that strawberry, so I would copy it and I have lots of the same plants. That's really good, except if all of those plants maybe have the same DNA. Well, they do have the same DNA. And maybe that makes them weak against a type of bacteria or a fungus or some animal that loves to eat it, and then they're all at risk of dying. So yes, it's really good to have the same if we like it, but if it's all too similar, it's a high risk they could all suffer. So it's a balancing equation. How plants usually reproduce though is that plants have pollen. And plants do have, I feel horrible to say this, But they do have parts. We have two parts for reproduction. We call them boy parts and girl parts, which is frustrating because plants are not boys or girls. But there are two different parts that we have to describe them. We have the stigma and we have the stamen. The stigma is the part of the plant which is prescribed as female, and the stamen is prescribed as male. That's because the male parts make pollen, and pollen will go from one plant to a different plant. If I have a flower, for example, here's my nice flower, I would have at the bottom here, that would be my stigma. Can you see that? No, you can't. Oh goodness, I'll move it back a bit. This here would be my stigma, and around the outside here would be the stamen. Because these here can then either, there's two ways, they can either be caught in the wind and be moved, or insects like bees come in, take the sweet things down here, rub off the pollen, and then come down. You can do this with the same plant. You can make clones by taking the stamen, pollen, putting it on the stigma, and you get the same plant. Or, and what the plants do this for, is that the stamen then, the pollen goes to a different plant, and you have a slight change in the genetic variation. That's how this works here. So you have the different parts, and then of course from here, if the pollen falls on the stigma, then you can get a new seed created. And then new seeds can of course mean new growth for the plant. A new plant can form. However, as exciting as plants are, and there should be a video for year 4 about pollination in more detail if you want to have a look, animals do some crazy things as well. Animals can do two different ways. They can do it inside or outside the body. Outside the body happens in places that have water. Not everything, but you have to have water, because if you're talking about animals, their reproduction needs the cells of a sperm and egg. Those need to be in a liquid-based environment. So if the reproduction happens outside the body, then it needs to happen in water. And if this happens, they make loads of sperm and eggs. Because they're outside the body. They are not being looked after by a mum or a dad. They are floating around in the water. Most of the babies that are created are going to be dying. They are not going to be successful. They are not going to develop into adults. This process is very common for frogs. You may have noticed very small, what we call tadpoles in English. Really, really small, hundreds of thousands of them. Only some will actually get through to adulthood and to be real living frogs. It's a real battle of survival in those early stages. But, of course, you can just release all the eggs and then don't care about it. So as a parent, you don't have to bring up your child, carry your child. So there's an advantage there as well. It doesn't limit you in any way. However, inside is more common. And certainly any animal that has, at any point in its history, evolved from a land is going to be doing this. This includes mammals, this includes birds, for example, reptiles as well. What these animals do is they have to have some kind of sex, some kind of intercourse. Not every animal has a penis and vagina. Certainly birds, they have like the same kind of, like just one hole basically, and the male has to like put their hole next to the female's hole and then release the sperm into them. So it's not the same mechanics for all animals, but the same mechanics are true in that you have to get the sperm from the father has to meet the egg from the mother. This is why it's really important for all animals that the woman or female is able to keep a moist area, because it needs to be liquid so that the sperm can travel. The sperm are not able to move if it's completely solid. And we use the word egg to describe the egg cell, because the sperm cell, which is much smaller, meets the egg cell, which is much bigger. You do get animals that actually make eggs, the eggs that we eat. You need to be careful about not being confused about that. Eggs are brilliant because then they're outside the body. You develop inside the body and then you can push it out. Eggs are useful because you don't have to be there all the time. But you do have to control temperature. But everything is inside the egg ready to form. The only thing that's important to get in is oxygen. Oxygen can pass through the shell. The shell has really tiny holes that we can't see, and oxygen can come in. Otherwise, everything else is inside of those eggs. What mammals do, they're geared. Of course, the birds here, they don't make the eggs. Mammals have to give birth to live young. It's a risk because mammals have to carry their child for a long time. Humans have to carry a child for 9 months, and certainly a woman who is 9 months pregnant is a lot less active. They're carrying a heavy child on them. But the young they are able to develop maybe are smarter, maybe are more developed, so maybe have a better chance of living. So there's a balance here in the risk compared to frogs where most die but some will live, to mammals where the numbers they have are usually a lot smaller, because many of them will not, they want them to survive, they want them to be successful and be developed. I'll leave that there. What we'll do in the next video is actually move on to the systems that human reproduction has and how that works. Thank you.